Yeah, really excited, Matt. So appreciate your time today. But,
Thank you. Yeah, and for the most part, yeah, this should be stuff that either I haven't said or covered before in an AMA, or stuff that people have been asking questions on, that I feel like we need to do a better job of kind of solidifying. So excited that you guys were able to bring in a very engaged community to chat about it. One of the things I have found to be kind of especially interesting about guilds and big time is they're actually more similar to, or they have more similarities to Web 2 type guilds than I think a lot of other Web 3 games that are out there right now. We're very much like player focused, of teams working together, and they tend to form organically as opposed to something to overcome a barrier to entry. And that's how I was able to get in contact with you guys and build this relationship.
perfect. Yeah, and we appreciate that because, really trying to understand this. We understand you're going to be taking on a big task onboarding the non-crypto gamers, trying to explain to them why they even need NFTs in the first place. I came from first-person shooter Call of Duty, and I never would have guessed that I'd be here. But now that we're here playing the game, I can't imagine the audience we're going to be talking to, hopefully in the next year or two, that's going to be much bigger than just the regular crypto gamers that already know about the traditional games today. I mean, with that in mind, we're kind of all accessing just a small sliver of the economy. We get that. There's no tokens involved, armories, time wardens, things like that. So with that in mind, like recognizing where we are today, I've been through gold and silver. Like, what's your thoughts on the economy? How's things coming along? And kind of where do you think we're at in this journey?
So we've only got about 4,000 users in the game right now. They're just the gold and the silver pass holders. And there is definitely a very active economy going on between users who collect the NFTs inside the game and then putting them onto the open market. And we can tell from the activity on the open market that it is both players and non-players who are interacting and buying those cosmetic skins, and then and then generally the supply is coming from those players. So it's functioning well right now. The economy during early access is very much driven by finding NFTs inside the game and selling them on the marketplace. That's kind of the limit of the economy right now. But by the time that global launch happens, there's a significantly different dynamic that goes on. And generally, the demand for cosmetics is going to come from players who want to have cosmetic skins or emotes. And then the supply of those NFTs is generally going to come from guilds and guild type activities. Those are going to be the ones who go out there and find those NFTs and then sell them to the people who want to have like cosmetics or some sort of moderate upgrades to their character inside the game. That's a very simple description of supply and demand for cosmetics inside of Big Time.
Earlier you mentioned it's coming from both players and non-players. Is it just investment, or where are the non-players really? What is their interest in getting them?
For sure, and let me give you a data point. And this is something kind of every user can do. Go look at the small rare on our marketplace right now. There is a number associated with each one of those small rares. If it was between numbers 1 and about, I think it's 16,800, it means that that small rare was bought during the December space sale. If it's any number above that, it's actually a space that was sold, or excuse me, that was found during early access period. And if you look at the quantity that's being traded on that, you can see that it's mostly people selling and buying space that was sold in December. So generally speaking, about 90% of the space sales that are going on in the open market are from people who did not get that particular space from in-game play. It's about 90%. And that trend generally holds true across the other rarities and sizes between players and non-players right now for the supply and demand of those NFTs. And when you ask like, well, who else is out there? I think there's a lot of things that a lot of audiences that Big Time appeals to. In no particular order, I would say it's NFT people, NFT enthusiasts, gamers, and metaverse enthusiasts. And there are not a lot of gamers in the game right now, but we are going to bring in a lot more gamers as we proceed through early access and into global launch. And correspondingly, we know that's a much higher demand. So for people who are very like kind of price focused, you would expect that as demand goes up, generally the prices of those NFTs would go up as well.
What's going to drive the demand for the users to have like the cosmetics over some of the utility projects that are out there?
Well, that's a twofold question. The first part I would say is why do people come to Big Time, and the second part is why did we go with cosmetics? So I think when people look at Big Time, I think they see that this is not your normal Web3 game. That the level of gameplay, the level of detail, the lore, the complexity, the expansive design, are not symptomatic of other Web3 type games. I think we are pretty far out there. And my personal opinion is we've got the best gameplay in Web3. Um, and I think we've done a very good job of that. And the developers have put together a heck of a game. And so much so, I think a lot of Web 2 gamers are going to feel comfortable going into Web 3, trying out Big Time, even though they've been somewhat skeptical about it in the past. So, first part, why Big Time? I think we made a really good game, very simply. The second part for why the NFTs inside of Big Time? Why cosmetics? Well, that kind of goes to a larger reason of how free to play games were the biggest boon to gaming and the gaming industry over the last like 10 years in a way that you wouldn't expect. It's $195 billion a year revenue across all of gaming, and about half of that is in free to play games. And then for cosmetics, we can see many users want it. That's what Fortnite is built on. It's what many other MMO games are built on. And I think 50 to 60% of MMO players buy cosmetics. And so that's really the demand that ends up coming into Big Time for who is going to end up buying those NFTs that are on the marketplace, and they are the demand.
Lots of people are kind of, they're grinding a lot, and there's a lot of fatigue that has been going on from Gold Pass to Silver Pass, and it's work. Can you kind of guide us as how's that going to pay off?
I mean, there's a couple things. So part of it is, my personal perspective on people who are playing it right now is a lot of them are trying to recoup their value from what they paid for the passes, and that somewhat changes the incentives as we go through, Gold, Silver, and Jade into Ruby and then global launch. So some users paid thousands of dollars for those gold passes, and they were grinding a ton, and then they were trying to recoup value, and many people were very successful in that. So for example, we had one user who came forward and was like, my profit, from what I was able to sell on the marketplace compared to what I paid for the pass, I made about $14 an hour. That's about what that was. That was a user sharing that publicly. Obviously, individual user experiences will vary based on your skill and where you're playing and how much you're playing. But that is the grind right now. And there are still going to be some of those mechanics in play as we go through Ruby and into global launch. But part of that grind goes away as the economy changes, right? Like you're seeing it very much like find NFT, sell it on the marketplace. That's the economy right now. There's more to the economy by global launch. Collecting resources, using your space, upgrading those NFTs that you find. So it is a different kind of management style of the way you want to approach the economy. The second part is that the levels and the gameplay changes significantly. Right now, you're only playing at Time's End. There are going to be more worlds released. And so one of them, for example, is Epic City, and that's much more of a community base where you can interact more with the lore, NPCs, and other people inside the game. So the gameplay and the grind is going to feel different as we go out of early access into global launch.
As lots of players pour in, will what we're accumulating be somewhat exclusive?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying, kind of without saying it explicitly is, am I going to make more money in the future?
and pretty much, yeah.
No, that's fine, because you're like, damn it, I'm playing a lot right now, and I wish I was making a lot more. And that's a fair question that people ask frequently in Web3. And this is certainly not financial advice, but I would go back to what I was trying to describe before between the supply and the demand in the game. So let's just talk orders of magnitude right now. We've got about 4,000 users in the game right now. That's pretty freaking small. And the overall NFT drop rate during early access drop was way high. Way, way, way higher than it is during global launch. And so correspondingly, the total supply of many of those NFTs that were dropped in early access are dropped pretty much only during early access. The total supply of NFTs that come out during global launch is that rate is way lower and the supply is mostly done during early access. So there's going to be moderate increases in supply of NFTs moving forward, but not that much. Let's talk about demand though, right? There's 4,500 player, or excuse me, about 4,000 players right now, but we're anticipating hundreds of thousands or millions of monthly active users. That's like 2 orders of magnitude higher. So, let's just say, hey, we're going to have 4 million monthly active users. It's a big increase. Let's say demand goes up by 100 times. Okay. But supply, from some of the charts that even you guys have released and we have released, some of those things are only going to go up by about 50%. So that's why we talk about, and if you kind of look at like that chart on like a supply or demand shift from somebody who's taken intro micro, you're going to have a huge increase in demand. You're going to have a very moderate level increase in supply. And the total changes of that means that the prices should go up significantly higher. That's I think the ROI that a lot of guilds or people who bought early access passes need to kind of keep in mind is like, hey, there's a lot more users to come. Right now, if you're talking about players demanding your skins, you've got a pretty dang small pool. You do, but we're going to onboard a lot more. We're going to go up to just shy of 30,000 here within a month or so. So like even that is going to be a 6-fold increase in players from where we're at right now.
So can I ask you, when is that inflection point? I'm just visualizing, this kind of, I'm more of a visual guy, so I'm visualizing this. Like, when do you think that inflection point is? I know the 30,000 users is certainly going to hit, but like, when does that squeeze really get? I think of it kind of as a short squeeze on supply here. Like, when does that actually hit? Is it after global launch? Will we see any of it prior to global launch? And then a follow-up question to earlier that I didn't quite get a chance to insert there that is along the same lines is, will we have access to different aspects of the economy before public launch? You had mentioned us transitioning from like NFT farming to different aspects. So those 2 points, when does the inflection point happen, and when do you see us having access to different aspects of that economy to kind of hit some of that?
It's a good question on the inflection point. I don't think I have a good answer for you on exactly when that will kick off, but just in terms of order of magnitude, there was about 1,000 gold passes, 3,000 silver, 8,000 jade. So, starting on June 7th, we're going to have, 12,000 users in the game. With Ruby Pass, it gets us up to about 30,000. So that's a doubling in the increase in demand. And then from global launch, like I've kind of already indicated what I think our numbers are going to end up looking like. We would compare ourselves generally to like another MMO Web 2 type game. I would anticipate that there's going to be an inflection point probably as Ruby Pass comes in, and then again as we hit global launch. I think that there's going to be two points there, largely just correlated with the increase in the total player base.
Yep, makes sense. Absolutely. And I think, is that supply strictly coming from us farming them, or are there other ways of supply? Where's all of it generated? I just want to make sure I'm not thinking this, on a micro level. Where's all the supply coming from? Strictly from us farming it, or how do you see that playing out in the economy long term?
So, I'll talk in the global launch sense, and this is what users probably have not heard before is essentially the recipe for upgrading those NFTs and how you use space. What the heck is space for? And so that is, we've said it.
Yeah. Inquiring minds want to know. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of hoped. People in here we're gonna ask or think about, and we've indicated through like Medium and stuff like that roughly how it works. But generally speaking, kind of a high level overview is what guilds are going to end up doing probably is combining space, and then they have things like these armories and forges and time wardens. And each one of those contributes to collecting items. So, for example, when you enable a Time Warden, a user can then collect that in-game token. All users right now can collect some of these other resources that we've alluded to in streams. For example, that ore or the gold that everybody seems to be picking up and not knowing quite sure what they can do with it or how it affects NFTs. Yes, you can use it to buy some of those in-game items from NPCs, but there's like a recipe, generally speaking, for where you take that lower level NFT, you bring it into your space, combined with that various servings of other in-game collectible items like the gold and the gems, and then you can upgrade that NFT, so to speak. That is really where the supply allows you to kind of to go. And so for the overall kind of guild and economy economics, it's not just collecting the in-game NFTs, but it's collecting those in-game resources, in some way pooling them, and then upgrading those cosmetic skins that are out there.
So essentially, it would make sense, to join a guild in that sense, and that kind of makes sense. And it's really the pooling of the time, the assets, the resources, and obviously gaming stuff like that. So is that really the value add here for guilds? And when people come in and ask us why I should join a guild or consider pooling my assets?
Yeah, that is a big part of it. On a very simple level, as I think many users have noted now, the NFT drop rate is significantly higher when you play with multiple people. So like you can go through dungeons on your own, for sure. But the NFT drop rate is higher when you play with a full group of 6. The enemy gets harder, and then correspondingly that difficulty, the rarity of NFT drops is higher. So there is a team aspect of it too. And then if you're all working on the same guild, then all those resources kind of go back to the same place. So by working in concert of like those groups of 6, and then all bringing them back to the same place, essentially allows for kind of that economy of scale we've seen in other games.
I think
Perfect.
what you guys are going to see as the economy develops is there's like lots of economic strategies. For instance, if you have a time warden, right, and the level of time warden you have and it corresponds to what space you put it in and everything. But you get the hourglass and you're going to have to recharge them, right? So you can potentially have an economic strategy that's just recharging hourglass and sending them out. Or you can have an economic strategy that's just collecting tokens. Or if you're a guild and you have enough resources, then you can like do a vertical integration and do the full economy up into doing the NFT, creating the NFTs and selling them. So there's like all these different strategies, and like how it works out and how it balances itself will be pretty interesting to watch.
Did I hear like it will take multiple cosmetics to do that, like together?
1+1
in the forge, yeah. Is that did I hear that or no? I thought I heard resources. I thought I heard like NFTs will go to the forge within the guild, and those resources will go together. Am I hearing right, or did I not?
So you are, but let me clarify. So broad strokes, that is correct. But for example, when you talk about that in-game token as being one of the ingredients for that upgrading, that token is on chain. And it only comes from in-game play. Yes, users can take it outside the game if they want to. They could, export it or whatever, or they could use it in-game. That is something that is on chain. So when you're talking about like kind of like burning mechanics or so on and so forth, as well as that cosmetic skin, yes, there are multiple types of things on chain that are required to do that upgrading process.
I personally won some great, a couple great NFTs. I love them. They're beautiful. I just, I wrap them around and I take them off to put them in the marketplace, and I can't run them in the game anymore. And I just noticed that I have to take them off. I can't run around with it, right? Basically, will that be the case if I take them out off chain? I'm assuming the same thing, right? You'll have to completely disconnect it from the game, or do you see those kind of somehow connecting in a more esoteric way to the external ecosystems as well?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to right now where you can't use an item if it's sitting on the marketplace. And that's so if you kind of choose to take a cosmetic skin and move it to OpenSea or whatever it is, you're probably not going to be able to use it inside the game at the same time.
With that in mind, lore, campaign aspects of the game, huge. I know a lot of the true gamers are just frothing to see what we have. So when do you think we'll have some of that? Will it be before EAL, and how much do you think we'll have access to with the lore and campaign aspects?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before, but with like the lore, a lot of that you can kind of expand upon it with as we get into the global launch with the multiple levels and the multiple worlds, and each one has like not just a complementary level of gameplay, a different focus between like combat and community so forth, but they're set in different time zones. So for people who have been observant and like, hey, there's dinosaurs and cowboys, and apparently there's saddles on the back of those dinosaurs if you're an astute observer. That all kind of contributes to the overall lore. What I can tell you though is that there's not an end to Big Time right now. So it's not like you've finished the game and you're done and you've won and there is overwhelming victory. That is not in there right now, in part because we have several years of expansions built in already. The developers have already put in, I think it's 5 years. So, if you're playing it just to get to the end, you've got a long road ahead of you.
I agree, and that ties into a question I had later on, but I'm just going to jump to it. I've watched a lot of AMAs, not as much recently because I've been in game, so it's harder to watch them. But early on, I heard something about NFT gaming hub with a built-in marketplace, and it just really kind of just gave me this picture of a bigger vision that you guys have, and maybe you can't share it, but do you see, talk about the content 5 years out and things like that, do you see other game launches? And then, is this kind of a situation where we're proving the concept for future games and potentially having access to a much bigger economy than we can even envision?
There's a couple ways to answer that. So, Big Time Studios was launched as a studio first, with the idea that multiple games would come out. Big Time was kind of the flagship and the first one, and largely a proof of concept. The team is kind of unequivocally focused on launching it successfully through global launch, and then those upgrades, so on and so forth. We love the idea of expanding, of course, but if it doesn't launch well, then it all kind of falls apart. I think several people could name a AAA rated game that kind of fell by the wayside, or several of them that fell by the wayside after a couple weeks in 2021, and we don't want to do that. And even though we may have great plans, without a great global launch, it's not going to happen. So that's why we're generally kind of under promising, over delivering. In that terms of that overall marketplace thing, I have noticed a lot of games, Web3 games, almost reverting back to Web2 type economics. Where guilds are not just a way to overcome a barrier to entry; they are a way for people to mass and to build a community, something similar to the raid parties in WoW. I think that has Schlitz. I think that's going to keep growing legs, and I think that is a very sustainable way of incorporating Web3 technology with Web2 type community.
Is that why you guys chose to go with the free to play?
Exactly. The free to play part opens up our player base a ton. Right? Like guilds did not start with Axie Infinity, but what Axie did kind of do is shift the priority of guilds to overcoming those very seriously high barriers to entry for a lot of people. But there have been guilds in Web2 games for a long time before that. And so with a free to play game, it gives you a much larger player base. Just kind of like an order of magnitude. You look at Axie, and I think their monthly active users is oscillated somewhere between about 1.5 and 2.5 million users per month, monthly active users. Well, World of Warcraft, which is around 24 million, and that's like down from a very high peak. Genshin Impact is around 50 million. Most of the other big MMOs out there blow the other Web3 games out of the water in terms of monthly active users. So how you get your users up? Well, one of the things we thought was not just make a good game, but make it a free-to-play game. And when you have a larger player base, it opens up a lot more options for your economy.
Exactly, and I think that's where the credit cards come in, and why we're all excited, because it opens it up to a whole new people who don't know anything about a MetaMask wallet, or how to even sell crypto in some cases. It opens it up to a whole new gamer. And just, when do you see that really transitioning? Like, are you guys planning on putting in the the credit cards and open that up as soon as EAL, or do you see that being delayed at all?
Yeah, the credit card thing has been somewhat difficult, kind of given larger global events. But the ambition was certainly to turn on credit card transactions before the end of EAL. That was absolutely the ambition. And so I think that is something that users can realistically look forward to prior to global launch, for sure.
And then also, if you could kind of explain what you see different. I mean, from World of Warcraft to Big Time, what I'm seeing on the forefront is, and why I really got into this, is it seemed like World of Warcraft had potential to, have economies that could actually make real world money, but it was never implemented. My hope is that that's a direction that Big Time's going.
A couple things jump out to me. I think the first part is we don't want to make it feel like a job. we could do, I think, a very good job of making a game that replicates real life and has an incredibly complex economy where nobody feels like they're crushing it, but they got to do it. But we didn't want to do that. We really wanted to make a fun game, and in some ways that meant prioritizing the kind of the fun and immersive part of the culture ahead of the economics part. So that's why we rolled out an EAL game with, just a very simple NFT to open market economy as opposed to the economy first. It was very much a game first focus. For recruitment though, what I think a lot of people can enjoy is look at the reaction videos we put together of some of the people finding NFTs. They like finding stuff inside of games. And what is different now is that with blockchain, you can keep that. And I think that's a real thing. We're used to getting loot in games that's been around forever. But what you have with blockchain is you can keep it and you can sell it, you can buy it, and big time you're going to be able to upgrade it, or you can move it outside the game. That is a technology you haven't been able to do kind of satisfactorily in Web 2 yet.
Okay, excellent. That being said, you kind of touched base on something else, that you guys did prioritize the game before the economy somewhat. When will we see, like, you talked a little bit about the lore and everything, and if you can, like, are we going to see like any more lore, any more like gaming type updates in the near future, or will all that be not until regular launch?
You mean like with expansions and stuff like that?
Yeah, expansions and just like maybe even more kind of story stuff. Will that like be continually evolving, or will that is that, I don't know if that's answerable even, but I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, so similar to what we've done so far, I think there's been like two major patches. There's been the silver patch upgrades, and then there's been the quality of life ones. And with the second one, we introduced the desert part of Time's End. So there was kind of like a modest increase to the amount of user play out there. That's certainly not off the table prior to global launch, where we continue to release some of those kind of additional expansions. Definitely not off the table. I don't have a timeline for you to kind of share of like, hey, on this date,
No worries. Yeah.
On the backside for like user experience, I can tell you that we do have a progressive way of onboarding servers. So, people who are like, hey, I have concerns about increased number of users, clogging down the servers and slowing down the experience. Well, we did kind of think of that, and we made sure that throughout each period of early access, we onboarded more servers throughout the world to make sure that those ping rates stayed high and satisfactory for users kind of anywhere they were.
Perfect. Okay.
But that's the thing, like, users don't really see until they kind of see the downside. They don't really see the upside of it.
Right.
And do you think there'll be like a partying system? You talk about the different servers and stuff. So sometimes we're jumping from server to server, things like that, trying to find friends. Do you see that coming into play soon? It's just, I think to your point earlier, full raid teams, we've all established that, having a full raid team is really important to the drop rates, right? And we all want to maximize our time. I find myself sometimes sitting there waiting to get on a full team. People drop off, people come on. Do you think we'll have that soon, or when do you think some of that will be? Because it does directly impact the NFT farming and maximizing your time in the game.
Yeah, kind of an improved ability to find parties is, I would say, probably top 5, top 10, somewhere in there, kind of feedback that we get from the early access forums. So, for people who are not as aware, we comb through both Discord and the forums every day, and we have a meeting every weekday about them for about 30 to 45 minutes, and we compile all of it, and then there's a comprehensive report about what exactly users are seeing, and that is combined from every region across the world where we have people. There are a lot, and so the best way for us to kind of fix bugs and implement patches is to kind of coherently describe whatever you're seeing inside of the forums. That's the best way for us to it, and we put an incredible emphasis on data and detail in that. And so if you give us a very logical kind of detailed response, we go and fix them. That being said, you asked about a party finding system. It's up there, and I think there's been a couple things that we've talked about for onboarding. For example, an improved way of finding party members, as well as being able to talk to them in game too. Those are all patches we've discussed. Unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for them, but they are definitely on the roadmap. I just can't tell you exactly where on the roadmap that is. Just like peeking behind the curtains, I'll give you a kind of an insight for how we do, community feedback. For anybody who's out there, we do have a listing on our job site for a head of community. But what we do right now is literally every single question that gets asked and responded to by the moderators gets logged, and we discuss it, every single one, and we tend to combine them because they tend to be somewhat repetitive, and they tend to fall into a fairly small number of categories. But our kind of litmus test is whether or not our moderators were able to answer questions directly from our wiki.bigtime.gg. And so that way we constantly updated the wiki to make sure, like, hey, is this something where we haven't answered it at all, or is it something where it's in the wiki and people just haven't been able to find it? And in that way, the wiki for us continues to improve. We continue to update it with more information as things come on board, and increasingly, it's like the one-stop shop for all kind of information. Don't get me wrong; our moderators will continue to respond to the best of their abilities as fast as they can, but that wiki grows based on the commentary and the feedback we get from forums and the Discord as well.
You kind of touch base, but if you could kind of just summarize, the tokens, like what's going to happen to the ones, if are they going to be upgraded, like when they're upgraded for crafting, then what happens to them? And then the other thing is they will go back into circulation.
Yeah, just because it's going to be a two-part question, and I am like a fish and like a goldfish, I will forget the second part.
Okay.
So when you take those tokens and upgrade them as part of that, that recipe of ingredients to upgrade the NFT, it goes back into the overall kind of supply. And there is a finite amount of tokens. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but generally speaking, it doesn't burn the token per se. It just goes back into the overall supply where you can get it inside the game.
Okay, cool. But if somebody takes it outside, then do those go away?
Well, if they choose not to bring them back in the game, then yeah, they wouldn't be able to. If they kind of put them on the OpenSea or do whatever it is that they do with them, then they can't use them to upgrade at that time unless they bring them back into the game.
Okay. The other question was oh, sorry. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just saying real quick on that then, if that's the case, and I could be completely wrong, and I apologize because, again, we're just brainstorming here with this, but if that's the case, then you're reducing the total supply of tokens if they remove it from the economy and bring it off-chain, then that actually, if you started with 1 billion and you take 100 million out, then those are no longer essentially in the big time economy, so that kind of impacts supply, which obviously kind of impacts prices. But we'll see where that gets. But there's initial thoughts when you say it that way. If it removes it from the economy, then there could be some situations where the the token becomes pretty valuable, right?
Yeah, and there are of course kind of more details about the economy that are still to come out, and I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of caveat this by saying that some of this is subject to change. We're describing kind of like a broad framework of like the way it's going to be working. Some of the details may change, and they're not going to change a ton. But there will be some refinements to make sure that we're real balancing. What you're talking about there in terms of like kind of hey, is this going to put like a pressure on the token and then corresponding shortages somewhere else, and then inflation or deflation, and then the green explodes and it catches on fire. That's what we're kind of retooling and balancing right now. And so that's really what the team is going through, and why we haven't been as forthright on the token part of it is because we are going through that retooling and the balancing right now. A lot of that internal testing. Broad strokes, that is the way it should work.
Awesome.
That's great.
So the other part that I wanted to throw by you is the upgrading of in the cosmetics in the forges and that sort of thing. So will they be upgrading like through rarity, like rare to epic to rare to epic to what would be the next? Well, legendary, like that process, or is it going to be going through tiers? Like you got your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, like those sort of things.
Yeah, I think broad strokes, the rarity is probably the best framework for it. I think we've described a leveling aspect to it as well. But the rarity is probably the best way to kind of encapsulate it right now for how those NFTs get upgraded.
That will for sure, or like change the appearance and that sort of thing too, as it goes up.
It will. Well, it depends on the item in play that you're talking about, kind of upgrading them. Some of them will change by appearance. Some of them will kind of change a little bit in terms of functionality of like what the skin can kind of do for you. Not in a way that affects like player stats, but there are some other components to the leveling up there that as you upgrade it to the higher levels of rarity that come into play.
So
Interesting.
that being said, I think that is we have a question in our community that kind of follows through that I think might be a good time to ask that. Frankie wanted to know if potentially titles could have more in-game uses that don't not necessarily play to win, but that titles could have some, like for instance, somebody told me the other day they bought the Lucky Night and they got 3 NFTs in a row, and that which I thought was great. I'm like, yes, like that must be like you better believe I went right out and bought that Lucky Night. But but just kind of a general question like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm kind of getting you're implying there potentially.
No, that is not what I'm saying.
No, not the Lucky Night, but what I'm saying is so maybe I misunderstood you. What you were saying about that there might be different interactions in the game as you upgrade.
For sure.
It would all be cosmetic though, because like if we were like, you're implying that the Lucky Night title would give you an increase in drop rate, but that would make it more of like a play to win game, right? And we are trying to avoid that. Everything we're doing on the NFT side is going to be
the NFTs is cosmetic, right? So it wouldn't really be play to win; it'd be play to earn, right?
I think I follow you, but I think broadly, these are some of the ideas that I've kind of heard like pitched around is like, for example, if you have certain types of skins, it can unveil certain types of like gameplay or certain levels. That was one of the options that we did discuss, and of course we have kind of more options, in terms of like those NFTs where we said, hey, these are only going to be available during Gold Pass. We were committed. We were like, hey, these will only ever drop during Gold Pass period. We were committed to that. But some people were like, well, you only drop 61% of them. There are other ways for us to hand out those NFTs or to get them into the hands of users without putting them as an in-game drop. That is some of the stuff that comes out with global launch in terms of how we incorporate that and for users to get those things. That's the same kind of general idea I'm mentioning when you have these cosmetic skins that level up. Like what kind of other utility do they have to them? It's not going to be a pay to win mechanic, but there are other things we can do inside of the game in terms of, enhancing user experience or certain types of like drops or access to things that's on the table. Dan, did I misstate there? Did I just make something up?
Oh,
I don't think so. I mean, there's lots of talks, but it's possible, right?
Yeah, and a lot of that, as I've mentioned before, is like, in no particular order of importance of like expansions that people ask us pretty frequently about. They say, when's mobile, when's console, when's PvP, when's Oculus, just to name a few. Those are all pretty big.
When esports.
When esports. I happy to chat about esports right after this, but right, those are pretty big moves. And so one of the things that we definitely look forward to Guild as like a consolidator of like opinion, of like audience opinion, is what is the most important? What if you saw to see an expansion outside of like, hey, faster server rates, so on and so forth? What is the most important thing you would want to see next? Because like I said, we watch these boards intensely closely. I've had more meetings on the community in the past 2 weeks than I ever thought I'd have on about a Discord in my life. But like if the community is like, we really, really want to see this first and like the first expansion, then we would be remiss if we didn't at least look at that as an option.
Are there systems in place for renting out space yet in game?
There is a way to rent out space to other people. Space obviously doesn't come out like until global launch, but it's a careful balancing act. And some people ostensibly say like, hey, I really, really wish I could just hand out space in a rental manner that however I want and permission however I want, but without kind of fully understanding that there's externalities to that I think they don't want in such a way that it contributes significantly to a worse user experience. And so that's what we're trying to go with that final retooling and balancing that Dan and I kind of mentioned before of we have a good concept of what we want to do and it's going through that final testing. Broadly though, you will be able to permission your space. But exactly how that looks like and in terms of the interface that it looks like is still what's to come.
And will that be adjusted for guilds? Will there be like broader abilities for guilds to do that in a more like I don't know what I want to say, a more like massive way?
Yeah, to kind of broad questions of like how was Big Time taking care of guilds? I kind of point to how we raised money in our first round or in our guild round. So like the Bloomberg article said, we raised about $11 million through private investors, and then about 10 to 11 million through guilds. And so some of those were very big guilds that people are familiar with, like YGG, Avocado, Opened Out. It would be remiss if we did not like consider how those guys operate as we put together our game and in terms of permissioning things like space inside the game. We definitely have those interests in our mind as something we have to balance for the scaling up the game as well as that in-game economy. It's something we have to balance against the player experience, but it's something we definitely keep in mind. You asked about esports, so while you're kind of picking up the next person to ask, because I do know that there are some esports people inside of this chat right now who have been listening along. I can tell you that we're not going to be able to do esports before the end of global launch, or excuse me, before the start of global launch. So that's just we have heard some cool ideas, but I don't think we can execute it. And it's not so much that it's not technically feasible. We definitely have the wherewithal and the engineering power to do it. But the bigger part of it was the validation and the testing to avoid kind of things like cheating or nefarious acting. Because as soon as you put esports on the line, those guys figure out any single way they can to kind of get ahead. And we've kicked around a few ideas. We've spoken with several esports teams about what they would like or what they would envision in a PvE type environment. And I know some of those individuals are inside this chat right now. But bottom line, in terms of like timing, we're kind of in nascent discussions with several esports organizations, but it probably won't be brought into the game until a few months after global launch. I think that's kind of the earliest esports people can kind of look forward to that feature coming into Big Time.
Will you be able to use the token, the in-game token, to purchase things in the marketplace?
Yes.